In this episode, we're going to slow down and look carefully at why endpoints, especially laptops and powerful workstations, deserve extra attention in security programs connected to payment environments. Even when an organization invests in strong network defenses and carefully designed servers, the everyday computer a person uses can still become the easiest doorway for an attacker. Endpoints are where people read email, browse the web, sign into systems, open files, and run productivity tools, which means endpoints constantly interact with the messy, unpredictable outside world. A high-risk workstation is simply an endpoint that has greater authority or greater exposure, such as a machine used by administrators, developers with production access, finance personnel handling sensitive reports, or support staff who can reset accounts. Hardening is the process of reducing unnecessary features, tightening settings, and adding protective controls so these machines are harder to compromise and easier to monitor. By the end, you should understand what hardening means in practical terms, why endpoints are frequently targeted, and how layered protections work together without becoming a pile of random rules. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. When beginners first hear the word endpoint, they often imagine a single category of devices, but endpoints come in different shapes and carry different risks. A typical laptop used for basic office work has one kind of risk profile, while a workstation used for software development or system administration has another. Some endpoints rarely connect to sensitive systems, while others are used to manage infrastructure, access customer data, or approve changes to payment-related services. The threat changes when the endpoint becomes a control point, meaning a machine that can alter other systems, deploy code, or access administrative consoles. Attackers understand this very well, which is why they often focus on stealing credentials from endpoints or tricking users into running malicious content. If you can compromise one privileged endpoint, you may gain access to many other systems without needing to exploit them directly. Hardening, therefore, is not only about protecting the device itself, but also about protecting what the device can reach. A mature security mindset starts with separating endpoints by role and privilege so the strongest controls are applied where the impact of compromise would be highest. A helpful way to think about endpoint hardening is to treat it as reducing opportunities, both for attackers and for accidents. Every feature that is enabled, every application that is installed, and every permission that is granted creates a chance for something to go wrong. That can mean a software vulnerability that an attacker exploits, but it can also mean a user mistake that exposes sensitive information or weakens a control. Hardening reduces those opportunities by tightening the baseline configuration, removing unnecessary software, and ensuring the remaining software is maintained and monitored. This is where beginners sometimes misunderstand the goal and assume hardening means making the computer unpleasant to use, but effective hardening aims for the opposite. The best hardening makes safe behavior easy and unsafe behavior difficult, so people can still do their jobs without constant friction. When hardening is done thoughtfully, it becomes a quiet background layer that prevents many common attack paths, especially the ones that begin with a single click in email or a single downloaded file. One of the first building blocks of endpoint hardening is keeping the machine consistently updated, because many attacks rely on known vulnerabilities that have already been fixed by vendors. Patch management is the discipline of applying updates to the operating system, browsers, productivity tools, and security software in a timely and reliable way. The reason this is harder than it sounds is that endpoints are mobile, sometimes offline, and often customized by users, which can create delays and inconsistencies. Attackers take advantage of that inconsistency by targeting the most common unpatched issues that exist across large numbers of devices. For high-risk workstations, update delays can be especially dangerous because those devices may have access to administrative systems or sensitive repositories. Beginners sometimes think updating is only about convenience or new features, but in security, updating is one of the most reliable ways to remove entire categories of known weaknesses. A strong hardening approach connects patching to clear accountability, So there is always a plan for how endpoints remain current even when people travel, work remotely, or rarely reboot their machines. Identity protection is another foundational area because most endpoint attacks ultimately aim to steal or abuse credentials. A hardened endpoint supports strong authentication and reduces the chance that a stolen password becomes a full compromise. On first mention, multi-factor authentication, MFA, is a method of proving identity with more than one factor, and it matters because it makes password theft less effective. However, relying on MFA alone is not enough, because attackers also use techniques like session hijacking, token theft, or social engineering to bypass normal sign-in patterns. Endpoint hardening, therefore, also includes protecting credential storage, limiting where credentials can be cached, and reducing the use of high-privilege accounts for daily work. High-risk workstations should avoid patterns like using the same privileged account for browsing, email, and administrative tasks, because that mixes risky activity with powerful access. Beginners should understand that identity is the key that opens many doors, and endpoints are where those keys are often stored or used. Hardening tries to make those keys harder to steal and harder to misuse. Privilege management is closely related, and it is one of the most important differences between a normal endpoint and a high-risk workstation. Privilege is the authority to install software, change system settings, disable security controls, or access sensitive resources, and excessive privilege turns minor mistakes into major incidents. A common beginner misunderstanding is that local administrator rights are harmless if the user is trusted, but trust does not prevent phishing, malware, or accidental clicks. If malware runs on a machine with high privileges, it can disable protections, persist more deeply, and harvest more valuable data. Hardening, therefore, often includes limiting administrative rights, separating administrative accounts from normal accounts, and using controlled processes for elevation when administrative tasks are required. This approach can feel inconvenient at first, but it is one of the strongest ways to reduce the impact of malware and the speed of attacker movement. For high-risk workstations, privilege discipline is even more critical because these devices often serve as the bridge into management planes, code repositories, and production consoles. When privilege is controlled, compromises tend to be smaller and easier to contain. Application control is another core concept, and it means deciding which software is allowed to run and how it is allowed to run. Endpoints often accumulate software over time, including browser extensions, utilities, file-sharing tools, and random installers that seem useful in the moment. Each additional application adds complexity and potential vulnerabilities, and some applications also introduce risky features like macro execution, embedded scripting, or automatic updates from untrusted sources. Hardening reduces this risk by standardizing approved software, limiting installation rights, and disabling high-risk features that are not needed for the role. Beginners sometimes assume that antivirus alone can catch anything dangerous, but modern threats can be subtle, and attackers often rely on legitimate tools or living off-the-land techniques that do not look like obvious malware. Application control shifts the model from trying to detect every bad thing to allowing only known good behavior where appropriate, especially on high-risk workstations. This does not mean you block everything and break productivity, but it does mean you treat software as a controlled inventory rather than a personal collection. When application behavior is predictable, both prevention and detection become more reliable. Browser and email safety deserve special attention because they are the most common pathways for initial compromise on endpoints. People use browsers to access web apps, documentation, and cloud consoles, and attackers use browsers as the delivery mechanism for malicious downloads, fake sign-in pages, and drive-by attacks. Email is similarly powerful because it carries links, attachments, and convincing messages that exploit human habits and urgency. Hardening in this area includes reducing risky behaviors through settings and controls, such as limiting automatic execution of embedded content and making it harder for untrusted files to run. It also includes educating users in a role-specific way, but the hardening focus is on technical guardrails that prevent a single mistake from becoming catastrophic. For high-risk workstations, it can be especially valuable to separate browsing and email from administrative activity so that daily internet exposure does not share the same session and privileges as sensitive operations. Beginners should understand that attackers often win by getting the first foothold, and browsers and email are where that foothold is most often obtained. Strengthening these entry points is therefore one of the highest value hardening steps you can take. Endpoint protection is also about detection and response, not only prevention, because no control is perfect and some threats will get through. On first mention, endpoint detection and response, EDR, refers to security capabilities that monitor endpoint activity, detect suspicious behavior, and support investigation and response. The important beginner concept is that EDR is less about scanning files and more about observing behavior, such as unusual processes, unexpected connections, or signs of persistence. Hardening works with EDR by making systems more predictable and by ensuring monitoring is enabled, protected from tampering, and configured to send useful signals. High-risk workstations should be monitored carefully because their compromise could lead to broader impact, and rapid detection can significantly reduce how long an attacker remains active. Beginners sometimes think monitoring is invasive or purely reactive, but in security, it is often the difference between a minor incident and a widespread breach. Monitoring also supports accountability because it helps reconstruct what happened and what actions were taken on a device. When hardening and detection are aligned, you reduce both the chance of compromise and the time to identify and contain it. Encryption and data protection on endpoints matter because laptops can be lost, stolen, or accessed by unauthorized people in the physical world. Even a well-hardened device can become a data exposure risk if sensitive information is stored locally without protection. Hardening includes ensuring storage is encrypted, access is protected by strong authentication, and sensitive data is minimized on endpoints when possible. For payment-related environments, this is particularly important because endpoints may handle reports, logs, or operational data that could reveal sensitive details if exposed. It is also important to control where sensitive data can be copied, such as into personal cloud storage, removable media, or unmanaged collaboration tools. Beginners sometimes assume that data is safe because it is behind a login screen, but physical access and device theft can bypass many assumptions, especially if the device is not configured to protect data at rest. Hardening also includes secure disposal and device lifecycle controls, because old endpoints can leak data if drives are not handled properly. When encryption and data handling are treated as standard, endpoints become less likely to turn into silent data breach sources. Network behavior and connectivity are another part of endpoint hardening, because endpoints are constantly joining different networks and interacting with many services. A laptop might connect from home, from coffee shops, from hotels, and from office networks, and each environment has different levels of trust and threat. Hardening helps by ensuring the endpoint behaves safely regardless of network, such as using secure connections, limiting unnecessary inbound access, and applying consistent protective policies. High-risk workstations should be especially cautious about network exposure because they may access administrative systems and sensitive services, and attackers often look for opportunities on untrusted networks to intercept traffic or trick devices into connecting to malicious resources. Beginners do not need to learn network configuration details to understand the principle that network location is not a guarantee of safety. A hardened endpoint assumes the network might be hostile and relies on strong identity, encryption, and controlled access rather than on being inside a perimeter. This mindset is increasingly important as organizations use cloud services and remote work becomes normal. When endpoints are hardened for varied networks, the organization is less dependent on perfect perimeter defenses. Configuration baselines are the practical way organizations keep endpoint hardening consistent, because consistency is what turns good intentions into reliable protection. A baseline is a set of required settings and installed components that define what a compliant endpoint looks like for a given role. Without baselines, endpoints drift as users install software, change settings, or disable controls to solve short-term problems. Drift is dangerous because it creates uneven security across devices, and attackers look for the weakest link rather than the average. High-risk workstations often have stricter baselines, including tighter restrictions, stronger monitoring, and more limited software allowances, because the consequences of compromise are greater. Beginners sometimes imagine baselines as rigid rules that never change, but good baselines evolve as threats change and as business needs change. Baselines also support faster incident response because responders can quickly compare a device against the expected configuration and spot unusual changes. When baseline compliance is monitored, organizations can detect when devices fall out of alignment and fix issues before they become incidents. Human behavior and operational habits still matter even with strong technical hardening, because people are the ones who make decisions about how devices are used. Hardening works best when it supports good habits, such as encouraging people to separate work and personal activity, avoid installing random software, and report suspicious behavior quickly. High-risk workstation users should understand that their devices are special because they can influence many systems, and that means they should treat their endpoints with extra care. Beginners sometimes think security is mostly about technical controls, but endpoint safety is often about choices made in ordinary moments, like clicking a link, enabling a feature, or ignoring a warning. A mature hardening approach includes clear expectations for role-specific behavior and creates a culture where asking for help is normal rather than embarrassing. It also avoids turning security into a constant scolding, because that leads to hiding mistakes, and hidden mistakes become bigger problems. When technical controls and human habits reinforce each other, endpoints become far more resilient against common attacks. Incident readiness is the final piece that ties endpoint hardening into a broader security program, because endpoints are often the first place you notice trouble. A hardened endpoint should support rapid investigation by having reliable logs, consistent monitoring, and clear ownership, and it should be configured so that responders can isolate it without destroying evidence. High-risk workstations deserve special incident procedures because their compromise might require faster escalation and more careful containment, especially if privileged credentials could be involved. Beginners should understand that readiness is not only about having tools, but also about having predictable processes, such as knowing who to contact, how to preserve the device state, and how to prevent the same issue from spreading. Hardening helps here by making devices more standardized, which makes response less improvisational and reduces the chance that a responder breaks something important while trying to help. It also supports lessons learned because you can compare incidents across similar baselines and see patterns in how attacks succeed. When incident readiness is built into endpoint design, the organization can respond with confidence rather than panic. As we wrap up, the most important takeaway is that hardening endpoints, laptops, and high-risk workstations is about reducing attack opportunities, protecting credentials and sensitive data, and making device behavior predictable enough to monitor and defend. Endpoints are targeted heavily because they are where humans interact with the outside world and where credentials are used, and high-risk workstations amplify that risk because they can reach powerful systems and make impactful changes. Effective hardening combines timely updates, tight privilege management, controlled software behavior, safer browser and email exposure, and strong monitoring through EDR so threats are detected before they spread. Encryption and data handling protections reduce the damage from loss or theft, while network-safe behavior ensures the device remains resilient even when it connects from untrusted places. Baselines and drift control keep security consistent over time, and role-aware habits help people use their endpoints responsibly without constant friction. Incident readiness ties everything together by ensuring that when something goes wrong, the organization can investigate, contain, and learn without confusion. For a new learner, the mindset shift is that endpoint hardening is not a single setting or a single tool, but a disciplined set of choices that makes the most common attacker doorway much harder to open.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.